welcome back to another episode of the Wealth Equation Podcast with Maurice L. Wilson of Wilson Wealth. Today's going to be a really great episode. Hope you're joining me live. If not, be sure to check us out on YouTube and all of the available podcast platforms. For those of you who are fortunate enough to be with us today live, you're in for a treat. Today, I have a very special guest out of Maryland, Eric D. Brotman of BFG Financial Advisors. He is a accomplished. I would say, hey, Eric is life goals for me. For people who understand that phrase, Eric's one of those gentlemen you meet and you realize you haven't been doing enough, and so I'm really going to learn something here today as well, and I hope you do the same. Eric, coming your own way. Introduce yourself to the audience.
Oh my goodness! Well, first of all, you did such a good job introducing me. I want to just bring you with me everywhere I speak. That would be great. Well, no, like you said, I'm the CEO of BFG Financial Advisors here in Lutherville, Maryland. Been in practice for 32 years, so I think I got a number of years on you. So don't feel so bad. It's a marathon, not a sprint. We've been doing wealth management for families all over the country now for again 3 decades. Yeah. And I was a startup in 2003. Okay. And now I'm working my succession plan and writing books and speaking and just having a lot of fun. You know, one thing your audience is going to find out real fast. If it's not fun, I'm not doing it. So this should be a good time tonight.
And the audience is going to be multiple ones here. I mean, we're going to hit with what you primarily, I'm going to say primarily do, but for anybody that's a financial advisor in the audience who's wondering why are 2 financial advisors talking, Eric, I mean, let's just go ahead and do the spoilers now. Tell them all the businesses that you do so we can really set the stage for what you do.
Yeah, no, I've been running what used to be Brotman Financial Group and was rebranded a number of years ago as BFG Financial Advisors now for 22 years. I also am a consultant. I started Brotman Consulting Group a number of years ago and work with financial advisors all over the country. And I do a lot of speaking and coaching and facilitations, working with teams. And then I also have a media group, and that helped us create a podcast and create a brand. And I've written 3 books and a lot of articles. And I'm easy to find online, which is good, I think. And so my role is changing here, Maurice. I am January 1st of next year stepping down as CEO after a really long, wonderful stretch. My successor is being named. Okay. Your audience is going to get a sneak peek because it hasn't hit the papers yet, but it's coming. And my job is going to be to do mentoring and coaching and teaching and speaking and growing the organization. So we've done a number of M&A deals. We've helped other advisors with their succession plans. You and I we talked before we came on air. We're not competitors. We're colleagues. And at the end of the day, I think there's so much abundance and so many opportunities that, households, families need financial advice, and they're going to work with somebody they identify with and feel good about.
And, picking up on that, I mean, what people, when they think financial advice and they think about what you and I do, if it's not college, which is a very, near-term goal, right? We know it's retirement. And that's from what I've read about you when we talked, I'm going to say specialize in, but you wrote a really good book about retirement called Don't Retire. Don't Retire, Graduate. It's sitting right here on the screen. I was going to say educate. And so
you can do that too.
And I would say that of all the titles I've seen over my 20 years in the business, this is one, graduate. That's because it's like you're at the retirement stage and you jump back to the high school, college, phraseology. Yeah. So delve into that. Like, what does that mean for the audience who haven't been fortunate enough to read your book yet?
Well, not yet, hopefully. But so here's the punchline. Okay. Retirement in its traditional sense is dreadful and no one should do it. And there's your lift quote for the show. Retirement in its present form, the way it's drafted, is a punishment. It's not something you succeed into. It's a terrible, terrible thing. And let me explain what I mean. In the 1800s, retirement was created in Germany, and it was created by Otto von Bismarck. I'm not making this up. Otto von Bismarck. And what he did was he said that people will essentially be forced to leave the workforce so that there's jobs for younger people. And it was like a sentence. You were sentenced to retire,
Okay.
which doesn't sound appealing at all. There is a building at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore, named the Osler Building, and there was a study done in, I think, 1913 or something like that, and there was a paper written by Dr. Osler, who said that your years of value are in your 20s. Once you're 40, you're really not worth very much, and by 60, you've had it. And I don't know about you, and I'm older than you, but not by a lot. I'm not 60 yet, but I don't
Right.
think I'm going to have had it.
No.
So, and then remember, we speak English, but we really don't. We speak American, which is butchered English from the UK. And in English, the word retire means to sleep.
Oh
It's
wow.
to retreat, or to go to sleep for the night is to retire for the night. It's literally like a dirt nap. Um, so you use LinkedIn. I know you use LinkedIn. There's people watching us on LinkedIn tonight. If you are looking for somebody to network with and you see somebody's profile on LinkedIn and it just says retired, you're going to keep scrolling. It might as well say dead.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I redefine retirement not as the absence of work, but as
Okay.
the absence of needing to work. If you have financial independence, you have a level of freedom, whether you're 42 or 82 when you get there.
Mm.
You have a level of freedom that allows you to thrive and to find joy in what you do. And if it happens to make you money, super, because you don't need it, but you're doing something you're passionate about. Well, that sounds a whole lot better than daytime TV and shuffleboard.
I agree. I
I'll
agree.
pass.
I agree. I
So,
agree.
and think about graduation. When you graduate, high school, college, any program, when you graduate, it's the end, it's commencement, right? It's the end, but it's also the beginning.
That's true.
People look forward to it because it springs you forward. It's not a retreat.
Right.
So I wrote the book to help people sort of redefine what retirement means and to figure out what they want to be when they grow up. And I ask every guest on my podcast, what do you want to be when you grow up? And some of them are dumbfounded by the question because they haven't been asked since they were 7 and they wanted to be astronauts.
That's true.
But there's a better path.
Right.
You know, for as long as we're blessed to be here and be coherent and physically able and doing something we love, I don't want to stop doing what I'm doing. If I'm 80 and still useful, I want to be at it, not because I need it, but because it drives me.
Mm.
But I'm sure as heck not going to try and die at my desk either.
No, and I'm seeing I'm on YouTube a lot, and I'm seeing now where they're saying, hey, if you're 55 and working, stop. If you're 60 and working, stop. They're lying to you about something. These are the titles. I haven't clicked on it because it's clickbait.
Yes.
But I
Yes.
personally want to work till 70. But Eric, I think like you're stepping down, but you're not walking out the door, right? What we get to do for a living is a blessing, and
Yes.
it's just so dynamic. One of the main reasons I left engineering, I'm sitting in my apartment in Detroit in 2000. .com bubbles blowing up, and there's these trackers on the bottom of the screen. Jim Cramer's is yelling, and I'm like, man, whatever this is about, it's way more interesting than what I'm doing in my cubicle down at Chrysler, And I
Okay.
connect the dots. I'm like, the bottom of the screen affects Main Street. I instantly saw that, and so we love what we do. But a lot of I'll say my clients. I won't speak for you.
Yeah.
And you're in the DC, Virginia, Maryland area, so everybody knows a lot of government workers and whatnot. Sometimes they take the great job, but they aren't following their passion. So are you finding that are you finding it's freeing people to pursue that? Have you found that as an inflection point for your clients when they've read the book or talked about it?
Well, certainly some of them have, and we've actually had some prospective clients read the book and then come in and they have questions before we even get started about that, which I think is kind of neat. Your question's a complicated one.
Okay.
because everybody's different. You know that if you work with 100 people, you're going to get 100 answers to this question. But I think there are two common themes. There's those folks who really don't like what they're doing and they want to reach that level of freedom so that they can do something else.
Correct.
And that's a lot of people. If you're starting to get sick to your stomach on Sunday night about 7 or 8 o'clock because tomorrow's Monday, then you're doing the wrong thing for a living.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So if that describes you,
Mhm.
then you want to be done as soon as possible. And that means you have to pivot. And
Right.
to pivot might mean getting re-educated or learning a new skill. It might mean hitting financial independence and doing something that right now is a side hustle.
Right.
I like to beat on millennials because everybody likes to beat on millennials, but they did come up with the side hustle. Us Gen Xers didn't come up with this.
No, no,
And the
not
side hustle is great because number one, it puts a few extra dollars in your pocket and allows you to save and potentially reach financial independence sooner. It
right.
also gives you a fallback if you wind up
True.
unemployed, either on purpose because you've said take this job and shove it, or
Mhm.
because there's been a layoff or something's happened. Giving them credit for one thing and one thing only. That's it. So, so that's the first group. The first group is people who don't like what they're doing and really want to be done and find another path.
Right.
And the sooner they can get to that finish line, the
Mhm.
sooner they can start living. And I know that it sounds profoundly sad, actually, but there's a finish line and they're gunning for it. They are
Right.
putting away money and doing the right things and saying, I'm going to do whatever I have to do to reach this inflection point. The
Right.
second group of people are people who really enjoy what they're doing,
Right.
and whether they've reached financial independence or not, they want to amplify what they're doing. They want to impact more people. They want to change the world in different ways. They want to leave a legacy, not just a financial legacy. They want to leave the legacy of a business or a farm or a family or other things. And so I think there's two tracks to run on here that are most common: those who are enthusiastic about what they do during the day and those who aren't.
That's
And
true.
it's pretty binary. It's pretty flip the switch because
Yeah.
for folks who like what they do are much happier
Yeah.
in every conceivable way than folks who are like, oh, it's Monday, I can't stand it.
Yeah, yeah. I like your weekend analogy. I tell people like, okay, Friday you're excited, you're done with this thing, right? Saturday you do your for you and I honeydew list. For those who don't, you
Man, how
do
did you know?
right, right, exactly.
You know.
And you start to breathe and enjoy life on Saturday, and I think on Saturday, you start thinking, hey, I can really embrace this and do something I want. And then Sunday, you rise determined, and then all your self doubts kick in on Sunday night, and you trudge yourself to work on Monday.
Yeah.
One of my jokes about the AI revolution and all this stuff, or just people wanting to get back to factory jobs and whatnot,
Yeah.
is that we never liked any of these jobs.
Right.
Factory, we didn't want to be in the farm, but there are things that people want to do. But first you got to get to that financial independence you were talking
That's right.
about.
That's right.
What do you think are some of the biggest mistakes people have made or are making when it comes to getting getting the right or the privilege to decide, hey, I'm retired or I'm going to graduate? What do you?
Well, first, there's so many. There's so
Mhm.
many different ways to mess this up,
Yeah,
and I don't want to make it sound like neuroscience. It's not.
yeah,
But we are all victims of our own behavior, our own upbringing,
mhm,
our own circumstances sometimes.
right,
And so I think people have a tendency. A lot of folks have a tendency to overspend. I think folks have a tendency to inflate what they think their earning capacity might be or become.
yes,
You see some people who are really high income, entertainers, athletes, people who make an obscene amount of money by any definition, who forget that their career might only be 3 or 4 years.
all day, all day,
And they start to live like they're going to make that much money every year for the rest of their lives, and they're not. And it creates a real problem, right?
mhm,
So I think part of it is not having the right habits. Part of it's overspending. Personal debt is an albatross. Student loans, by the way,
yeah,
I consider student loans on almost any undergraduate education to be a
uh-huh.
terrible idea. All right. Now I know I just made a lot of people go, huh?
Yep,
But getting an education and trying to improve your station in life economically is a wonderful thing to do. But you don't need a name brand school to do it. You
no,
need a piece of paper.
that's true. That's
You
true.
need an entry ticket. It is not necessary to spend 50, 60, 80, 90, $100,000 a year
Mhm,
for an undergraduate education. If you want to borrow money to go to law school, dental school,
mhm,
for graduate, I get it because
right,
that is now a career investment.
Right.
But to borrow money to go to some fancy school to get a political science degree or a minor in art history, you're out of your mind if you don't have money. If you have it, great, go spend it, enjoy yourself.
Right.
But if you don't have it,
Mhm.
you don't want to go into that kind of debt as a young person, because this really, time is only on your side if you're able to start immediately.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Go ahead. I'm sorry. I don't want to interrupt
No, no,
you.
you're fine. So think about what it takes to build a nest egg. We all instinctively understand the math. You put away $100 a check for 50 years and it's going to become something, right? I mean, you can do the math. But if you're starting not at zero, but at negative 30, 40, 80, $100,000,
That's true.
it's going to take you some time to get there.
That's true.
And if you look at Social Security, let's talk about the third rail, because neither of us, I presume, are running for office, so we can do this
No,
without getting without having rotten vegetables thrown at our cars or something. But
not a chance.
think about it. When Social Security was started, or pensions, which, as you know, have gone largely the way of the dodo. I mean, you've got some government pensions, but there aren't that many in the private sector anymore.
Right.
When that happened, people were starting their careers at 18.
That's true.
In the 50s and 60s, most people didn't go to college. They got a high school degree and they went to work. So they're 18 years old. They're getting emancipated. They're starting their careers. They were going to work until 60 or 65 years old, and they were dead at 72. Okay. Today, people don't start their careers till 22, 23, 25. If they're doctors, they're 30, right? They want to retire when they're 56 and could live to be 101. The math doesn't math.
It doesn't math.
All right. And so Social Security has problems because the math doesn't math. People are living 30 and 40 and 50 years past their retirement age.
True.
And they're not entering the workforce as early as they used to. And when they do enter the workforce, if they're at negative 40,000, people are paying for student loans when they've got kids to educate already.
Yes, I've seen that firsthand. It's pretty crazy.
So you asked, what are the things that derail people? Debt is a killer.
Okay.
All right. Now, not all debt is bad debt. And I understand that. A mortgage is not bad debt if it's a reasonable mortgage rate, and it's a home that's potentially appreciating, and it's where you're going to live for a long time.
Right.
That's fine. If you're buying a business or starting a business and there's loans involved in starting a business, I don't know how you started yours, but I had to borrow from every place because no bank would talk to me. Yeah. No bank would talk to me. Now they're tripping over themselves to get in our door.
It's like a P&L.
Correct. And some tax returns. But
Mm.
when I didn't have 2 years of history, the banks were like, no, sorry, thanks for playing.
That's true.
So if you look at the way that those decisions get made, and that's debt, but that's an investment.
Right.
All right. Getting a Gucci watch is not generally an investment. Buying a car is a horrendous investment. They don't appreciate, unless you're collecting vintage rare cars and there's a market to resell them.
Right.
The Honda you just drove off the lot is not appreciating. In fact, it's worth a lot less than it was 10 minutes ago.
Yep.
So when we get into debt situations, it really does hamper us. And so I encourage people, and in the book, one of the things that I talk about is pay yourself first.
Yes.
It's not enough to live within your means, because living within your means means you make $80,000 a year and you spend $80,000 a year. Well, you're living within your means, but the day your paycheck stops, you are broke.
True.
So you have to live within some percentage of your means. And if you start doing this at 22, that percentage might be 85%.
Right.
If you started at 42, it might be 68% that you had to live on, because you're not going to catch up. That you have time on your side when you start early. So you start those habits and you start funding your 401k, and you start funding an HSA account, and you start funding a mutual fund account or a savings account or whatever it is.
Right.
And you just do it, and you ignore the news du jour, the crisis du jour, which I know you tell your clients that is it a good time to invest? Well, I don't know. I was watching CNBC and look what happened. That news, it doesn't matter. Right. It really doesn't matter. Now, I'm not going to say it doesn't matter to everyone. There are certainly people where it matters, But if you're doing the right thing, and if you're young and you're buying, it doesn't matter what the news du jour is. Don't get fooled by it.
Right. That's true. That's true.
So it's all behavior.
It's
It's
true.
funny, when we started the company, one of the pillars we were thinking of using in our branding and our marketing was that we were assisting with behavior management. This
Yeah.
is true story. And we had an advisory board and we had a focus group and we asked people what they thought about it. And the guys thought it was great and the women hated it. Hated it. They did not want anyone to manage their behavior in any way, shape, or form. And it wasn't something I had thought of because I have the Neanderthal brain, but we had to not use it. But the truth is, behavioral finance has become a field of study.
Oh,
It's psychology,
oh, yeah.
and the way to build wealth, I believe, is almost entirely based on behavior.
Yeah. I would say behavior is fees. We won't get into whether you got fees, taxes, and behavior. Those are the three things that derail returns, and so you're totally right. And the industry has tried to address this with the target date funds, right? And used to be when I looked at the client's 401k, you probably remember this in the days of the big time mutual funds, they'd have 50 mutual funds in their 401k. And
Yes.
I would have to charge because I'm like, I have to go through all of these. Then it was the index funds. Now it's the target date funds. So you feel like the target date funds are helping to kind of address the behavioral lag on people's retirement returns?
I think the target date funds are a little bit like training wheels on a bicycle.
Okay. Okay.
They're going to teach you to ride, but you're not going to look cool riding them for very long.
And I just want to interject here because we didn't practice or do any. I was hoping you and I were on the same page on target date funds, and it sounds like we are.
Well,
It sounds like we are. So you go ahead.
well, I'm sure we'll find something we can argue about. That makes for good. That makes for good video.
Right, that's true.
But no, target date funds, they're fine for a small account,
right,
where you don't have to worry about allocation and you just do it. But here's the thing: target dates aren't all made the same.
that's true.
Target date X and target date Y and target date Z have completely different strategies baked into them. And the costs tend to be a lot higher
Yes.
because it's like the fund of funds. You've got the costs of the costs.
Mm-hmm.
So while I don't think they're horrible, I do think that they are training wheels, and it's better to do that than do nothing. So if you're having analysis paralysis and you're saying, I don't know what to pick,
right,
it's much better to do that and say, okay, I'm going to get on this glide path and start the account. If you're 23 and you've got your first job and you're putting $80 a check away, be in a target fund. It's fine.
Right.
But at some point along the way, those $80 deposits are going to become 10 or 20 or 30 or $50,000. At which point, maybe you don't want to just hold a fund that's in whatever it's in, because you can look under the hood.
Right.
Investors and consumers can look under the hood if they want, but they don't any more than I look under the hood of my car because I don't know what's going on under there.
That's true. Same here. That's true.
It's all transparent. It's in your 400-page prospectus. Happy reading. Have you ever read a 400-page prospectus? Be honest with me.
No, I checked. I have my highlights. Annualized returns, fees, composition,
Okay.
management tenure.
I'm not sure I know anyone who's ever read one. And by the way, if anyone generally were to sit there and read it, they wouldn't understand it in the first place.
That's true.
It's not helpful. All the disclosures are not helpful.
Right.
There's a much better way to educate, and we're not going to do a compliance show tonight,
right.
Because everyone will be like, click, I'm done with this. Yeah. I don't want to talk about that, but consumers beware, because there's so much out there that it's confusing, and I almost think it's confusing on purpose.
Okay. I hadn't thought about that, but yes.
Well, it's much easier to hide the fine print on page 309.
That's true.
Than it is to stick it on a 4-page fact sheet where it's a critical piece.
That's true. And
you see that in contracts, you see it in legal documents, you see it in various types of things. And unfortunately, consumers, this is a trust business.
Right.
It's a trust business. People have to, in the same way that you have to trust that your dentist understands what's going on with your molar, because you don't. You
Right.
have to trust the professionals, and the financial industry has a real problem. In my opinion, it's got a real problem with helping consumers understand who are professionals and who are salespeople.
And this is true. This is true.
And the day you graduate from college and you take a job at XYZ Mutual, and I'm not picking on anybody, but you take that job and your business card says financial advisor, financial representative, you've got 4 hours of experience.
Right. That's true.
Okay?
That's true.
That is like a license to hurt somebody.
This is true. This is
All
true.
right. Accountants have to go through a process. They have to get their undergraduate degree. They have to do a certain number of hours. They have to pass a board exam. They have to, lawyers have to spend certain number of hours and go to law school and pass the bar, and there are credentials. You're a financial advisor if you say you are the day you show up at some of these companies. Well,
I mean, it's true.
I
I mean,
mean,
I think insurance professionals have to do a little bit more classes. At least
uh,
I did for my
well, but
license.
not the day you show up.
Not the day you
I
should.
mean,
No, you're
yes,
right.
yes,
You're
you have to be licensed to sell, but I got news for you.
right.
If you had a friend who wanted to buy something, they'd send somebody with you to sell them something.
That's true.
Somebody with a license was going with you.
That's true. That's true.
It's just it's a system that it rewards bad behavior
This
by
is
the
true.
advisor.
This is
It
true.
does not put the client first. And the big lobbies are fighting this stuff in Washington. They're fighting against fiduciary standards. They're fighting against putting clients' interest before their own because it's not good for the companies that manufacture product.
This is true. this
So,
is this is
so
true.
I presume, and I'm in deep trouble if I'm wrong, but I presume that Wilson Wealth is not a product manufacturer, and that you don't have your own fund, your own annuity, your own insurance contract, your own anything.
Nope.
You are representing clients and clients' interest only, and that's that.
All day, 100%. That's
Okay.
why I left the broker dealer. But go ahead. Yeah.
So here's what that means. That means that if you have 100 clients, you have 100 bosses, but you're only responsible to them.
That's true.
You are not responsible to make sure that whatever company has whatever on the shelf, that
Mhm.
you're having enough people buy it
Right.
so that you can keep your cubicle and go on your reward trip.
Yeah. There's no quotas.
So, and consumers don't know the difference, and and some do. I know there's some savvy families out there and consumers out there, but a lot of them don't. And so, being able to be transparent with your fees because they matter.
Right.
And that's not to say that the lowest cost provider is always the best. I don't want the cheapest dentist either. While we're talking about that, at some point, I'm willing to pay a little more for certain experience, for certain service, for certain value, for certain expertise. I don't want the cheapest lawyer. I don't want the cheapest auto mechanic.
Hmm. Hmm.
All right. There's certain things that are commodities where cheap is fine. You know where it's fine in our business? Index funds. If you're going to buy an index fund, cheap is good because they all own the same thing. If there are 6 funds and they all own the S&P 500 index, they should be basically the same.
That's true.
At which point cost matters because they're all the same.
That's true.
But if there's any intellectual capacity, if there's any advice, if there's any crafting or uniqueness to the plan at all, it's no longer all the same. It can't be cookie cutter anymore.
Right. Right. No, that's true. And I mean, I think this is where this is all still kind of related to the product we started with, which is Target Date Fund, where, you know, I think that's another product that the industry's created. To your point, it's very opaque. And I think one of
Yes.
the biggest disservices it does is it kind of, I think, was created because the index funds got too popular, I think. And they were working so well. So they created this target date funds, and they're everywhere now. They're in the 529 plans. But I think one of the biggest problems with that particular product, if I can, is that it's what you said earlier, the longevity is so long now, and I started so late, and I'm shutting down at 55, and I probably should be pressing the metal a little bit more. And if they don't have an advisor telling them that, then they're just saying, hey, I want to retire in 2035, and I'm 55 now, and this is my solution. So yeah, I think the industry definitely can do a disservice to people when they kind of create these all-in-one products. Um,
Well, age isn't the only variable that matters. In
that's true.
fact, it may not matter very much at all.
That's true.
Health matters,
Yep.
family status matters, your wealth level matters. All these things matter. If you show me two people who are 45 years old,
Mm-hmm.
who make the same amount of money every year,
Mm-hmm.
who have the same account balance,
Mm-hmm.
and they both want to retire in 10 years,
All right.
and one of them has four children and an 80-year-old mom in a assisted living,
Mm-hmm.
and one of them is single with no kids. You can't
Mm-hmm.
tell me they should invest the same way. They're both the same age. They both want to retire the same time. There is nothing else in common between those two human beings.
This is true. This is true.
And that's what's wrong with target dates. And that's what's wrong with just checking a box and moving on.
This is true. This is true. I mean, it's almost like you. I mean, I know we're biased on this thing where we're almost expressing the need for intervention with a financial advisor or something. I mean, but it's not what I've learned. When I got into business, and everything was, Susie Norman get out of debt or Dave Ramsey get out of debt, right? We didn't talk about these type of topics. What I didn't see coming, at least for me, is the amount of wealth that's been accumulated in these accounts, and now it's just a different story. Combined with the money that's one generation ahead. Like, hey, Maurice, I've just inherited $1 million, and I got everything you just said, Eric, about the multi-generational house. And what do I do, right? And so
Mhm.
you can't just robo advise and index fund that. That has to be gamed out. Trust accounts are no longer just for rich people. And
That's
it's
right.
almost like, yeah, I mean, you almost, and people say, Maurice, what are you talking about? Well, I don't know about you, but people still don't understand Roth IRAs. Like, so if people don't understand
Basically,
Roth, you know what I'm saying? So if you don't understand Roth IRA, then, it gets more complex from there. So it
it
really does.
does.
Yeah, yeah. And that's why it's like with your books and whatnot, you're making the industry more accessible, right? You're creating a glide path to kind of get this advice. Hey, come in, and at your firm, and not that I'm trying to really, well, we are plugging you. Your advisors are kind of compensated, in a manner. I think I like what's to me that
Mhm.
allows the client to kind of feel okay. I mean, tell them about how you work with your advisors.
Yeah, no, all of our advisors are salaried.
Yeah,
And when I say that at a financial advisory conference, they're all perplexed. Like, what do
yeah,
you mean they're salaried?
yeah.
And I mean it. There's a salary because we're paid for the work that we do,
Right.
and selling anything to anyone is not part of how any of our folks get paid. Our folks get paid on client acquisition, client retention, and client service,
Right.
and and maintaining their integrity and their licensure and their compliance record and doing the right things. If you take great care of people, others will flock to you.
That's true.
It's just very simple. And none of our advisors, none of our advisors are incented to behave in ways that so many advisors are incented out there in the universe.
True.
And people don't understand it because some people are like, well, wait, what if I bring in lots of clients?
All right.
Well, then I assure you, if you bring in lots of clients, your salary will not stay where it is. But it doesn't matter that you've used product X versus product Y, or that you're generating a certain amount of revenue. We are not tying it to that.
Right.
We also, most of our advisors have come in, half of them have come in straight out of college
Okay.
to an apprenticeship where they're spending 5 years with us, salaried, before they're sitting in front of clients by themselves.
Wow. Now,
All
you didn't
right.
tell me that.
So
Wow.
imagine this: you're 22 years old,
Mhm.
and firm A over here says, "Oh, write down a list of 100 or 200 people you know. We're going to teach you a sales script. Call them all and sell them something."
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
No. At our shop, it's come in, learn the business, be in investment operations, get your licenses, begin your CFP education, start doing meeting prep, start sitting in meetings with clients, doing the note taking, doing the wrap up, doing client communication, be second chair in the session so that every meeting has two advisors in it. One
Okay.
who is the seasoned senior person who's rendering the advice, and one who's making sure that it all gets done and gets handled properly and is learning along the way.
Right.
And
Right.
by the time they're ready to take on client relationships. They've already been in meetings with these people for 2 and 3 years and exchanged emails and been on phone calls, and they're already comfortable, and the transition is natural, so
Yeah.
that they don't have to go out and sell anything to anyone. They can just work with the families they already know, who
Right.
already understand what they're about, and now their career has taken a turn, and they are lead advisors. Now, this only works if the firm is generating enough new clients to feed all those advisors.
Right.
Hence the podcast and all the publishing and speaking. I mean, my job is to make rain.
Right.
And if I'm making rain, if I'm attracting people to the firm, we then need lots of buckets to catch the rain,
Right.
because there's only so much that I can do. So we have 10 advisors here.
Right.
We have clients in 37 states. We have 10 advisors, and we work with folks across the spectrum. There's a couple other things. We don't have a minimum asset level.
Okay.
And advisors are like, what do you mean? You should only be working with folks who have $1 million or more, or whatever it is. And I have too many people we represent
Mhm.
who had $50,000 with us and paid for a basic financial plan, and then inherited money or
Sure.
changed jobs or got married or something happened, and now they're $2 and $3 million clients.
It's true. It's true.
And they weren't gonna, if I had said, hey, thanks, but we won't work with you, they weren't gonna say, hey, now I have enough money, can I work with you, please?
That is true too.
They're gonna say, to heck with that guy.
Yeah.
So our younger advisors can work with families who are up and coming. We work with a lot of Henrys. You know what Henrys are? You heard that
I'm not
acronym?
rich yet.
High earners, not rich yet. People who have the ability to generate some wealth,
Mhm.
but need the knowledge. They don't have the time. They don't have the acumen. Maybe just don't like doing it, and that's okay.
Right.
Maurice, I'm gonna drop a little wisdom on everybody that you're gonna find surprising, and so are they, and that is that not everybody needs a financial advisor.
Oh yes.
Okay,
Yes.
not everybody needs one.
Yes.
I think outcomes tend to be better when you have an advisor, even if it's just an accountability partner.
Right. Right.
I look at it as I have a trainer. If I didn't have a trainer, I would not work out. Because if I have an appointment at 4:00, I'm going to be at the gym at 4:00. If I don't have an appointment at 4:00, I'm going to have something more fun to do at 4:00.
That's true. That's true. True.
And if I'm at the gym and I'm feeling a little sleepy, my workout will be shorter unless I have somebody barking orders at me.
True. True.
Well, this is no different. If you know you've got a meeting with your financial advisor and you said you were going to pay off that credit card and you were going to start funding your 401k and you were going to meet with an attorney to get a basic will done,
Mhm.
and you show up at that meeting and you haven't done any of those things, you're going to feel a certain way.
Yes.
And so knowing that there's a meeting in 3 months or 6 months or whatever it is, there's a due date for this homework,
Mhm.
people get it done. And and this is, I'm not saying this in any punitive way. I'm saying I'm the same way.
Oh yeah.
If I know that I need this by next week, it'll be done by next week. If it's get to this when you feel like it, it might never happen.
Oh no. Redoing my closet, redoing my home office are things that I want to do for myself, but there's nobody making me do it. And you know who that person would be in our households, and they aren't making me do it. So it just keeps getting pushed down the calendar. And you're right. I mean, one of the principles of influence, and I might fumble this, I think, is reciprocity, where you
Mm.
ask somebody to do something, and because you ask them to do it, it kind of puts them on the hook versus you expecting them and not kind of formalizing it. So I think it's like when you you make the reservation at the restaurant and they ask you to call and cancel, versus just not having any policy in place. So, and I do find that clients do tend to apologize a lot when they don't do certain things to me. And I hadn't thought about it in the way you just described, because you're like, hey, you're human, but they feel like they've let you down, and so they do want to hold themselves accountable going
Yeah.
forward. So yeah,
And
you're totally right.
they want to exceed expectations.
That's true too. That's true too. That's true too.
If they set a goal that I want to be mortgage free by 2024 and it was 2018, and you've got 6 years, now you got 5, now you got 4, now you got, and so how do we help you get there? Here's the track. If you want to be financially independent in 2042,
Mhm.
and that's an arbitrary number, I'm making this up, but if you said by 2042 I'm going to be X years old, I want to be done,
Mhm.
you can instantly calculate, here's what you'd need to put away based on a reasonable rate of return and certain assumptions. This is
All right.
what you'd need to put away. Now you mentioned the Roth IRA, and I think this is interesting too.
Okay.
Whether you inherit money or whether you invest money or however you receive it in your life, a dollar is not a dollar. They're not all the same.
Okay.
If you have an IRA, you have a balance in an account that still has a mortgage on it.
Oh, I like that. I like
Okay.
that. I like
If you have an IRA account that's $1 million
Mhm.
and you have a Roth IRA account that's $1 million, they are not the same.
No, they're not.
Now, people tend to find this out the hard way a lot of times.
Yes.
Sometimes they find out about it after they go through a divorce, and one party
Mhm.
really messes with the other party because they're like, "Oh, you each get $1 million." Well, that wasn't particularly fair. Somebody pulled one over on you, right?
Right.
They're different because the Roth is spendable money
Yeah.
and the IRA still has a mortgage on it. But unlike a mortgage you sign up for on your house,
Mhm.
the mortgage is unknown. What are the
Mm.
tax rates going to be in 2041? Are they going to be higher or lower? Where are you going to be living?
That's true.
Are you going to be living in California or Florida?
It's true.
Are you going to pay 12 or 13% at the state level or zero?
That's true.
Are you going to be in a high bracket or a low bracket? How are you going to use this money? Do you know what tends to happen? IRAs get built up, 401ks get built up, and then people have required distributions.
Yep.
And the age keeps getting older. It was 70 and a half for a long time. Now it's going up to 75.
Yep.
And I don't know about your clients, but our clients, a lot of times, they get to where they have the required distributions and they're angry because they
Yep.
don't want to pay taxes.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah.
And what our job now has to be is not only do we want them to use this money smart, in a smart way,
Mhm.
we don't want them to wait till RMDs to do it.
Right.
We
Right.
want to play that tax planning game. How can we use some of these dollars
Mhm.
and replace dollars that have a mortgage on them with dollars that are paid off?
All day. All day.
Okay. And if you have an estate tax issue, now the federal estate tax right now requires you to be ultra wealthy, and most people are not near that, although it could be changing January 1.
Right.
But every state is different. And in the glorious state of Maryland, we have the unfortunate condition of being the only state in the US that has both an estate tax and an inheritance tax.
Okay.
Both, which is my way of saying they get you coming and going.
Right.
So
Right.
um, if you're going to lose some money
Mhm.
to the government instead of going to your kids,
Mhm.
that requires some planning.
Yes.
I also know there's a lot of people out there who don't understand what's going to happen when they leave money behind.
No, they don't. They're not trying to tell
And
them.
I don't know.
Mhm.
My daughter, God love her, she's 15 years old.
Mhm.
Anything I leave her right now, of course, is in trust. If it
Right.
wasn't, she'd be getting it at 18.
Right.
I don't know what you were like at 18, but if a bunch of money fell in my lap at 18, it would
Oh, yeah.
not have gone well because I didn't have the wisdom, the maturity, or the acumen. I would have messed it up royally.
Right.
All
Right.
right. And that doesn't necessarily change with age. I know
Mm.
it's going to sound strange, but some people are great with money.
That's
Some
true.
people aren't.
That's
And
true.
so if you've got kids who are 35 and they're not great with money, or maybe they're great with money, but they're married to somebody who isn't.
That's true. That's true.
All right.
Mhm.
The reason to use trust, you said trusts aren't only for wealthy people, and it's true. Trusts are protecting people from themselves
Yep.
or from predators and creditors.
Yes.
All
Yeah.
right. Predators in the form of a nefarious spouse. There's a reason why 23-year-old people sometimes marry 80-year-old people. I'm not saying it's not love. I'm not going there on the show, but there might be other considerations. I'm just saying. So you have to protect people from that.
Mhm.
And you get money to your kids or grandkids, you want to keep it in the family line. You don't want to lose it because one of your kids marries a knucklehead.
It's true. That's true. That's true. I mean,
And that's why the planning makes a difference.
definitely, definitely, definitely. No, I mean, and that actually brings me to something I wanted to ask you because you got the
Yeah.
Henrys, I've got the Henrys, and then
Yeah.
we've got the people this, and I feel like what people don't understand, people associate financial problems with just people like being broke and in debt. But you and I probably can attest that actually the problems increase as the income increases in terms of mismanagement. I would also say, just like you said, they think they'll be making this money forever, lifestyle creep. And then just not planning their dollars, like, the dollars with the mortgage. I love that. I'm going to borrow it versus the dollars without the mortgage. Um, I have a lot of clients in that space, right?
Mhm.
What have you seen that has worked to effectively communicate to that crowd? Hey, this is serious. We need to plan. You're not always going to be in the chips, as they say. Can you break through? I guess is what what cuts through the noise with that crowd, you think?
There's a couple ways to look at that too.
Mhm.
First, people confuse income and wealth.
Mm,
They're not the same.
mm,
Um, and I know people, I've met plenty of people who have incomes that are off the charts, but
mm,
couldn't rub two nickels together if they had to. And I
mm.
know other people who have had what I would consider a relatively modest income and they've built massive net worths
Yeah.
because, and we talked about behavior. The income in and of itself is not the same as wealth. You sometimes read, oh, this is the wealthiest state in the country. No, it's not. It's the highest income state, but they take most of it.
Right.
So there's that. The second thing is that you talk about where problems amplify with money. I would say complexity amplifies. I don't know that it's necessarily problems.
Good point.
I think things become more complex because there are more facets to the conversation. Now you have to look at taxes in different ways. Now you have to look at how one decision impacts another.
Right.
At the lower end of the spectrum, you have to understand how a certain income might impact, for example, financial aid.
Right.
If you've got kids and they're getting ready to go to school and you're in a position where you're going to apply for financial aid, that might not be the time to start that side hustle and ramp your income up by just enough that the college goes, now you're on your own.
There you go. There you
All
go.
right, it's a simple example, but that's true. By the same token, you don't want to be in a position where you've got no tax diversification, and people think about diversification as just what their investments are.
Right.
There's
Right.
more to it. There's tax diversification, and we never know what the rules are going to be. Congress changes tax laws something like 800 times a year. It's
Yeah.
the dumbest thing you've ever seen in your life.
Yes. Yes.
And the tax code, I think, is the longest book ever written. If I'm not mistaken, the U.S. tax code is, in fact, the longest book ever written. I challenge you to read it. You're better off with a prospectus. We talked about that. So if that's true, we don't know if a certain administration is going to say, we want to tax the heck out of capital gains because they're only for rich people.
Right.
Where now, if you were relying on accounts that had capital gains, you don't want to do that.
Right.
Or they say capital gains are great. We're not going to tax those anymore. We're only going to tax ordinary income. You say, oh my gosh, all my money's in an IRA. It's ordinary income.
Right.
You want to be able to play the game, and it is a game.
It is a game.
If you've played Monopoly, and I know you have, never with your grandmother because she always beat us.
Right.
But if you played Monopoly and you played at somebody else's house, do you ever notice how occasionally there were house rules?
Yeah, particularly in Uno as well. Particularly,
Okay.
yeah.
Did you ever play with somebody who changed the rules in the middle of the game?
Oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah.
That's what the government is doing constantly with our tax rules.
That is true.
They're changing the rules. So our job now is we have to plan based on what we know, which is what's here now.
Yeah.
I hear people making decisions based on what they think the government's going to do. I've heard people taking Social Security at 62 instead of waiting because they're afraid it's going to go away. Well, they might be right. They might be wrong. I think probably they should play with the rules they've got, not knowing what's coming.
Right.
There are people who will, capital gains rate. We talked about that. If you're relying on a step up in basis, and I don't mean to get technical, but if you've got an account and you've got $1 million worth of funds or stocks or whatever it is, and you paid $100,000 for it, and it's worth $1 million, and you sell it, you have to pay capital gains tax on $900,000.
All day.
If you die with it and you leave it to your daughter doesn't have to pay taxes on the $900,000 anymore.
That's true. That's true.
So what people are doing sometimes is they're gifting their daughter some of the shares where she doesn't get that step up, and it doesn't make sense. It's generous. It doesn't make sense.
Right.
People are so generous with charity.
Right.
People are so generous with charity, but the vast majority of people are doing it in an inefficient way. Most people with some resources should not be making charitable gifts with cash.
Mm,
ever.
mm, mm.
Because if you have a mutual fund that grew and you can donate the fund, you can avoid the capital gain.
That's true. That's true.
What you
That's
don't want to do is sell the fund, pay the taxes, and then make the gift.
true.
And if you have that $1 million IRA and you leave it to
There we
your
go.
kids only have 10 years now.
Yep.
They have 10
Yep.
years to spend the whole thing.
Yep.
If we live to be 93 and we leave a big IRA to our children who at the time are 65,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
our IRA could screw up their Medicare premiums.
Yep. Yeah.
I mean, when you think about the way it can snowball, if you leave the IRA to charity, they pay nothing.
Right. Right.
So, and QCDs, I'm assuming you're seeing some of these for older folks. They're qualified charitable distributions.
Mhm.
Once you're 70 and a half, and of course that 70 and a half didn't change like the RMDs that did change, because
Right.
why make it simple? But you can gift money right out of your IRA to charity. That is for anyone over 70 and a half.
Mhm.
I can think of no better way to give to charity than that,
Right. Right.
because it counts toward your required distribution if you have one.
Okay.
It goes to the charity, and it avoids, not only does it avoid the ordinary income tax that you would be paying, it reduces your balance a little bit so that your required distributions won't be as big, so they won't cause you tax creep.
Yeah. You got a good point there.
All right. So what else has the government done in the last decade? Tax Cuts and Jobs Act,
Yep.
2017.
Mm-hmm.
2017, the government came in, and this is not a political statement because both parties are full of nonsense and they go back and forth all the time. But Tax Cuts and Jobs Act changed the way people itemized on their tax returns, because it capped the SALT. The state and local income taxes got capped at $10,000.
Mm-hmm.
So people who were living in California or New York or Maryland who paid a lot of state income taxes used to be able to deduct that against the federal tax.
Yep.
And now they can't.
Right.
So when that occurred, they also, to offset that, they raised the standard deduction pretty dramatically.
Mm-hmm.
That means something like 92% of people in this country now don't itemize.
Mm.
If you don't itemize, you don't deduct charitable contributions anymore. Right? So now you're making a gift to charity, but unless you do some planning around it, you're not getting out. You can love the charity and want to do something nice, and that's a great thing.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's real money that you're donating to a charity,
Right.
if this isn't what you put in the collection plate, but this is some real whatever,
Right.
you plan around it. So now you have donor advised funds.
Yep.
And donor advised funds allow you to take 5 years of a potential gift, put all of it in an account now, take the tax deduction, make sure you itemize, and then drip it out to the charity over a period of time.
Yep. Yeah.
People aren't, no one who's not in our business is keeping up with all this stuff. In
No.
fact, people in our business aren't keeping up with some of this stuff.
No, it's too much. I mean, that's the one thing about the business. I said problems, but you're right to say complexity. We've gone from mutual fund pushers and get out of debt people to everything you just talked, because you talked about Secure 2.0, Secure, the first one, all that happened since the pandemic, the 2017 Act, and then the donor advised. These are all things that have really come on my radar in the last really 8 years. Through application. But yeah, some people, they slam into it because they, kind of back into it, and if nobody's there to help them, they're just operating off an old playbook. It's something you constantly have to reevaluate. And you even said it might change again in January. So,
well, it may. In fact, I read an article today that talks about the House proposal and the Senate proposal, and they're different.
Yep.
And so even how this potentially changes is going to be argued about for a while, and then they'll wait until the 11th hour, and then something will pass under the cover of darkness, and then we'll read about it and have to react the next day, because that's what Congress does, right? In my estimation, we talked about tax diversification. In my estimation, one of the true paths to financial independence is having not only enough money to live on, adjusted for inflation in a way that you can't outlive it,
right,
but ideally in a way that also won't be impacted by dramatic tax code changes.
That's me all day.
Because do you remember in anything you studied over the years what the highest marginal income tax rate was in this country?
What is it, 90%? Am I right?
91. I think it was 91%.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
When they were making movies in black and white,
Yep.
all right, and they had to pay for a war,
Mm-hmm.
the highest marginal tax rate was 91%. But the reason it was 91%, and the way that they got away with that, because I would say, well, if the government's taking 91%, I'm not working anymore. I'd rather just I'll live under a bridge. Thank you very much. But everything was deductible. Everything.
Okay.
So what it did was it created an entire generation of people who had to make this choice. Think about this choice when you get your check. I can either spend $1 or save 9 cents. They all spent the dollar.
Right.
And why not?
Right.
The reason that was important when paying for a war is that our gross domestic product is based mostly on consumer spending.
Okay.
Which means if people stopped spending money because they were afraid of wartime, it was going to hurt the economy, and that was paying for, among other things, the conflict.
Right.
I mean, do you remember after 9/11, do you remember one of the first things that George W. Bush told everybody to do? Buy cars.
Oh, wow. Okay. Okay. I don't remember. I remember getting the check he gave out. I don't remember the cars.
It was buy cars. Car interest rates on cars went to 0%. Everything was same as cash because they knew that consumer spending was going to stop because there was fear.
Right.
So they had to incent consumers to spend, because if consumers aren't spending, our economy crashes.
Right.
Our economy is totally consumer driven, 70%.
Yep.
Government and business can't fix it. It's all about the consumer. And when consumers are freaked out, they're not spending money. When there's fear, they're not spending money. When markets get real ugly or the recession happens. So what happened during the recession? Interest rates dropped to almost zero.
Right.
So that means, after that period of time, that means that money was cheap and people could borrow, which means people could buy houses.
Right. Yep.
If you ever feel like we're just marionettes and there's puppet masters with string, arguably it's true. And that's not conspiracy theory. It's just that that's what drives behavior.
Yeah. No, I mean, because everything you just said up to that point, that's how we got to the housing bubble, right? I mean, everything got to zero. Well, people started jumping into their houses, and we started farming out the loans and everything.
Well, yeah, and packaging it and selling it and not caring who paid it back.
Yeah, because all the homes could never fail.
Well, yes, and people who couldn't qualify for a Discover card were getting homes with 125% loan to value because they only go up.
They only go up.
What could go wrong, Maurice? So I got a question for you, and I would never put you on the spot. It's your show. If you were on my show, I'd put you on the spot. But in my estimation, there are 4 places that most American taxpayers, I'm not talking about something esoteric, but most American taxpayers have 4 places I'm aware of where they can put money, where used properly, it's never taxed again, at least during their lifetimes and possibly thereafter.
I mean, what, life insurance, Roth IRA. I know. Well, I guess it's the Muni. But no, they're tax. I'm gonna go life insurance and Roth IRA. I'm gonna go 2 for 4.
That's 2. All right. So yes, and most people don't get the life insurance, but the permanent life insurance is in that way incredible. And in 2008, there were only 2 asset classes that made money. One was permanent life insurance, and the other was managed futures for people who were slinging natural resources and on agriculture and precious metals. They had a great year. They haven't had a great year since, but they had a great year in 2008. So the other ones are the 529 plan. Okay. And the health savings account.
I always forget the HSA.
Don't forget the HSA.
Yeah.
Here's what I would say. The HSA is the most perfect tax vehicle ever invented. The HSA is an accident. It's a gift from Congress. Okay. And don't tell anybody because they'll change their minds. But here's how the HSA works for those who maybe don't have one or don't know how to use it.
Right.
The HSA is the only account that I know of where you can take a tax deduction for your contributions regardless of your income. You can grow the money tax-free and invest it. It doesn't have to sit in cash.
Right.
You can withdraw it tax-free so long as it's for medical care, but that can include Medicare premiums, long-term care, other types of things.
Yep.
Used properly, it's the only triple tax-free thing on the planet. You know how to screw it up?
I guess don't put
There's
money.
2 ways there's
Uh,
2 ways to screw up the HS well, 3.
okay.
One is to pull money out for something other than medical care. That's a disaster and don't do it. The
Yeah.
second is to die with it.
Uh,
If you own an HSA when you die, it's 100% unless it's to your spouse,
right.
it's 100% taxable the year you die. That's a terrible outcome. And lastly, don't confuse the HSA with the FSA.
And see, that's why I stay away because I mean, you always have to. They did throw that wrinkle in where it's like, okay, you have an HSA or FSA because it's very different. But go ahead, I'll
A
let you finish.
flexible spending account is use it or lose it with a
Yeah,
very small carryover, a few $100. It's going to be in cash. You have to decide before the year what you're going to spend, and you can't change it during the year. And so you put a
yeah,
little bit of money away
yeah.
and you get a tax deduction for it. And then December rolls around and you wind up with 6 pairs of glasses that you don't need because you didn't spend it.
Yep,
However,
that's what I
there's
remember.
also a flexible spending account for dependent care,
Okay.
which is a home run.
Okay.
Because if you are a single parent or you're in a 2-parent household and you've got kids in daycare,
Mhm.
it allows you to put $5,000 a year into a plan that's pre-tax. You can essentially write off some of the daycare.
Right. Right.
That's a big deal.
That's a big deal.
Daycare's real expensive.
Oh yeah,
So that's a
daycare. I
big
mean,
deal.
yeah, that'll cover summer daycare for 2 kids. Just a
So
little.
HSAs you don't want to die with. 529s you can die with as long as the kids aren't the successor owners.
Okay. Okay.
You want to name successor owners who aren't the beneficiary so
Right.
that it doesn't become an irrevocable gift. And if you do that, these can go on for generations. There's rules against perpetuity in trusts. Trusts are limited to 99 years. 529s don't have limits on them. You could essentially pass this down for 3 generations if you wanted to.
Now I didn't on that one with the 3 generations. Does there have to be somebody under a certain age? Because no, okay, so it can just sit there.
No, first of all,
Mm-mm.
there are people who are single and they're not even married yet. They don't have kids, and they're opening 529s
Mm,
for themselves
mm.
because in their state they can get a deduction for the contribution. Some states do. And then you can change the beneficiary once a year. So once you have a kid, you name the child, and now you have an account that you've already started funding. You started paying for college before you got married. 529s are incredibly powerful used properly. The other thing that they can do, if you've got grandparents out there,
Yeah.
I don't know about you, but I think most grandparents think their kids are rotten and their grandkids are perfect.
That is
Yep.
kind of consistent, yes.
Okay. So grandparents can put money away for their grandkids' education.
Mhm.
They're allowed to fund 5 years up front. So they don't have to use the annual gift exclusion. They can gift 5 years up front, put it in the account. It is outside of their taxable estate, and it's not an irrevocable gift. They can still take the money back if the kid turns out to be rotten or if they need the money.
Yeah.
Show me something where you can make a gift that's taxed like a completed gift that you can change your mind on
Mhm.
and that's not included in your estate, even though you have control over it when you die.
Well, see, you are because I have not delved this deep into 529 plans, and that's usually not my thing. I'm usually a nerd about a lot of this stuff. But one thing I took away from 529 plans, and maybe you can correct me on this might blow. But is there, I mean, I know there's a dollar limit, but nobody really
Yes.
knows what it is, right? And I always thought it looks like these are estate planning vehicles. That was my in terms of like you can chuck all this money in,
Mhm. Yeah.
and do different things with it as long as you've got somebody out there that can get it. And I guess you're kind of saying that in better ways than I'm saying, and it's kind of like right up under the rug. Nobody really talks about it. So,
Yeah. No, it's a wonderful estate planning tool.
okay,
It's
okay,
a tax reduction tool.
mhm,
It creates enormous opportunity for kids to avoid student loans and those kinds of things. It passes it down between one generation to the next,
mhm,
income tax free and estate tax free if you do it right.
yeah,
There's ways to mess this up too. Don't get me wrong.
yeah.
Here's the other thing. It allows you now
Mhm.
to take up to $10,000 a year out of the 529 to pay for private school,
Oh, they updated that. Okay,
K to
okay,
12.
yeah.
So if you've got a kid in private school, and let's say your state allows you to deduct, like the state of Pennsylvania allows you to deduct up to $19,000. I think it's the full annual gift from the state of Pennsylvania's taxes,
Good.
for example.
Mhm.
If you've got a kid in private school, you can literally fund a 529, put in $10,000, get
Mhm.
a state tax deduction, and pull it out 3 days later and pay it towards tuition. And you just got a tax break on your tuition legally.
That's true. That's true.
These rules are they're so absurd, but if you know how to use them, and none of these things are going to get you audited. We're not talking
No,
about anything that's in
no,
any way nefarious.
no.
I would never suggest that. My reputation is not something I'm willing to risk for anything like that. But these are things that if people understand how to do it,
Mhm.
there's some really, really thoughtful ways. There's upstream gifting, there's downstream gifting, there's charitable, there's split gifts, there's trust. I mean, no client gives a darn what the tool is.
That's true. They don't. It's alphabet soup.
It's here's what I would like to accomplish.
Mhm.
Maurice, I trust you to come up with a solution that will accomplish that. And you might come up with 4, and you can talk about which one works best, and there's pros and cons, and all that's great. They don't care what it's called.
Mhm.
You could call it green jello if it solves the problem. Really.
Yeah, no, you're
Um,
totally right.
so if that's if that's true,
Mhm.
then our job is to not only communicate and educate
Mhm.
and advocate,
Right.
but it's also to motivate because people have to take action.
That's true. That's
You
true.
know, and the Susie Ormans and Jim Cramers of the world are not educating people, they're entertainment. And I was once asked when I started my podcast, I was working with an agency that was trying to help figure out, I was like, what do you want to do, and what do you want, why do you want to write books and do podcasts? And I said, because the world deserves better than Jim Cramer and Susie Orman. Why not me? That's literally what I said.
Yes. Yes.
Jim Cramer is entertaining, but if you were to take his advice, you'd be out of your mind.
That's true.
That's not to suggest there aren't people doing it and getting hurt by it.
Oh yeah.
Susie Orman back in the recession, who was talking about all these various things. Actually, I believe, and I don't want to besmirch the woman because she could come after me all day long. But I believe at one point her entire portfolio was in muni bonds.
Yeah, I've heard something to that effect. Yeah.
So and look, maybe that's a old wives' tale. Maybe it's urban legend.
Mhm.
But if it's true, she was saying, thou shalt, but not for me.
Right. Right.
I own my own everything. Our investment committee, I own what our clients do. And I will tell you, if you've ever been in a restaurant where the chef won't eat,
Yep.
don't eat.
There you go. You're totally right. So, I mean, this has been great. This has been like one of my favorite sports guys. It's been a football meat sandwich, but it's been a lot of stuff. I mean, you really have enlightened me on the HSA and the 529 plan. But for people who are going to who are in these positions, how can they work with you? What kind of give me the litany of ways they can reach you because you're so prolific. And I think it bears stating that you are, if I read your bio, aren't you an accredited estate planner? Do I have it right?
Yes.
So if you're
Yes.
wondering how Eric knows this, he's just a financial advisor. He is. Check out his bio. It's got an alphabet soup, but the estate planner stood out to me.
I took a lot of courses.
Yeah.
Early in my career because I was 21, 22 years old. I came into this business. I was trying to start a practice primarily in life insurance.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I looked 12. I mean, I didn't even shave every day at the time. And I'm trying to render financial advice. And as you know, that's nonsense. So I had to learn.
Right.
And I went to every class I could get my hands on. I had an employer at the time willing to pay for my schooling. I didn't take loans to do it. And I got every piece of education I could because I knew I couldn't artificially grow gray hair or a bald spot, although I'm doing fine now. I couldn't artificially do that. I couldn't fake or make up wisdom or experience.
Right.
But I could know more than most of the people I was talking to.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is now I encourage our advisors to do that. And now I'm no longer trading on intelligence. I'm trading on wisdom because I've seen it now.
Right.
That is a pendulum that has swung where I'm now the old guy in the office who says, oh, I remember this from the 90s and da 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 da. Right. For me to suggest that I'm technically sound as somebody who just passed a CFP exam last month, I'm not.
Right.
But I've seen some of it before, so it makes a really good combination. So for folks who want to get a copy of the book, I'll shamelessly plug the
Yes,
book
please
because it's
do.
here.
Yes.
That is Don't Retire Graduate. You can go to don'tretiregraduatebook.com and buy it. There's also a workbook with it. If you go through the workbook, you will wind up with a financial plan. And in fact, the book itself, I don't believe in homework. So even though it's written a little bit like it's a college curriculum, it's the freshman, sophomore, junior, and senior years of your financial world. And
Yeah.
that's how it's broken down. Every chapter ends with a quiz. They're not graded, and an extra credit assignment, because I don't like homework, but everybody does the extra credit. So
Right.
if you do those
Hmm.
assignments, you will wind up with a financial plan. And some of the assignments are things like have a conversation with your parents if they're living about their care and what's important to them. This isn't all just, hey, here's how do you invest.
Right.
It's a lot more than that, and it really does walk you through, and it meets you where you are. So if you're a young person just getting started, definitely start at the beginning. If you're a grizzled veteran of these battles and you're trying to figure out what's next, you can skip some things. There's a couple chapters on how to get out of debt.
Right.
If you don't have debt, skip the class, go directly to the advanced lesson, right? So that's the book. You can also go to bfgfa.com. That is our company website. I think, Maurice, there's so many different kinds of investors and of families and of financial advisors. And ultimately, I think it's real important to find somebody you're comfortable with. And so
Oh,
the folks who are choosing you are often not going to choose me, and the folks who are choosing me are often not going to choose you, and that's okay.
yeah.
It's okay, because whatever folks are looking for, this is a relationship that is as it's really as intimate as medicine.
Right.
There's no disrobing in our office most of the time, but you have to have personal conversations. I mean, about the marital stuff, and about when there's a kid with a gambling issue or a drug
Yeah.
problem or a lousy spouse or boyfriend or whatever. Like, you have to be transparent, and we're not therapists.
Right.
I don't know if you have a therapy degree of any kind, but I certainly don't. I'm not a therapist,
No, no,
but
that's
but
not my.
we but we do deal with some messy stuff in life, the tragedies, the opportunities, the crossroads, the do I take this new job, do I move to North Carolina for this, do I, what do I do with mom's house, do I take dad's car keys, I mean, whatever it is.
Right.
We wind up involved in those conversations, and so you need to find somebody you feel real comfortable talking to. That's all.
Yeah, and I mean, to your point about, it's so many, you're going to pick who you're comfortable with and blah, blah, and things of that nature. I feel like if I did pick an advisor and there was one guy who's like, I don't talk to other advisors, just me, I know everything, versus somebody that's, hey, I go to conferences, I learn from other people, I'm deep in my textbooks and whatnot. I'm gonna choose the latter. I just feel like we know this. The day you think you know everything, you're done. And so,
Yeah.
when I talk to people like you, and I don't talk to a lot of other advisors until we go to conferences like later this year, I can bypass the education, like the table stakes education, and we can get deep into cases, right? Because
Yeah.
yeah, that's where you benefit. So and as you know, when we first met, I was a little leery of like, oh, how does it work with two advisors on the show? But now I'm like, yeah, I'm gonna do this more often. Like,
Well,
because you definitely have
well,
brought some things to light. So I just think I definitely think it's something that should happen more often.
well, I take that as a high compliment, and I've had a lot of financial advisors on my show, and and they're as long as they're doing the right thing by people, it
Mhm.
comes down to comfort. It
Yep.
comes down to and it's hard. Breaking up with a financial advisor is hard. When somebody's got an advisor,
Uh,
they're real hesitant to go. The banking industry learned a long time ago that if they have 4 or 5 different lines of business with you, they can't leave.
right. Right.
It's a nuisance to change financial institutions.
Right. Right.
And so you really have to feel like something's wrong.
Right.
You're uncomfortable, or there's really something significantly better. And so, I think trust your gut.
Right.
Trust but verify.
Right. Just
Look up the records, look up the compliance records and all the public thing, because Some people are just wonderful salespeople, but
Yeah,
not particularly good advisors.
definitely, definitely, definitely. Well, great. Well, I appreciate your time. We definitely gone over our allotment, but hey, it's because it was fun. I'm going to dig into some of the things you brought up here, and just this is a point of professional pride, and just check into it. But thank you for your insight. You can find me at just wilsonwealth.com, the Wealth Equation podcast on YouTube, and we have our newsletter. Thank you, audience, for spending time with us today. Hopefully, you've been enriched. Look for more to come, and I think we'll have Eric again. And this time maybe I can teach him a couple of things.
I'm I'm
you know,
I'm always excited to learn something from you.
definitely, definitely. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a good evening, and we will talk.